On our wedding night, while I was pouring 2 glasses of champagne in the next room, my wife was texting another man. I saw the screen light up on the bed. Just 3 seconds, just long enough. Relax. In 1 month, his father's company will be ours. I stood there in the doorway, holding 2 glasses that were suddenly very heavy. She looked up and smiled at me, the most beautiful smile I had ever seen, and she said, "What's taking you so long, my love?" I smiled back. I walked over. I handed her the glass. Because what my wife didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't the billionaire's son anymore. My father had cut me off years ago. That empire she was counting on, it would never be ours. It would never be mine. I owned a 1-room apartment, a used laptop, and a job most of her friends would laugh at. She married me for a fortune that didn't exist, and I was going to let her believe in it, right up until the day it destroyed her. My name is Daniel Okafor. This is the story of the year my wife spent trying to steal a kingdom I had already lost, and the kingdom I built while she wasn't looking. Let me take you back to where it started. 6 months earlier. I never wanted to go to that gala. I want to be clear about that from the very beginning, because everything that happened afterward grew from one evening I almost skipped. It was a tech and charity event at a hotel in Gangnam. My company bought a table, and my manager was sick, so someone had to represent us. I drew the short straw. I put on the one suit I owned, a decent one, but the same one I wore to every wedding and funeral, and I told myself I would stay 1 hour and leave. I was standing near the back, holding a drink I wasn't drinking, when a journalist walked up to me. She looked at my name tag, Daniel Okafor. She tilted her head. Okafor, she said slowly. As in, Chief Emeka Okafor? The telecoms Okafor? I should have said no. I should have said, "That's my father, but we don't speak." Instead, I said nothing. I gave a small, polite smile, and I let the silence answer for me. And that silence, that single second of silence, changed my entire life. Because the next morning, there was a photo online, me, in my one good suit at a billionaire's charity gala. And underneath it, a caption someone had written without ever asking me a single question. Heir to the Okafor fortune spotted in Seoul. I laughed when I saw it. I actually laughed. I thought, what a ridiculous mistake. It'll be forgotten by Friday. It was not forgotten by Friday. By Friday, I was getting messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. By the next week, I was being invited to events I could never have afforded to attend. Doors that had always been locked were suddenly held open for me. And I did something I am not proud of. I told myself a lie that felt harmless. I told myself I never claimed anything. If people want to believe something, that's their business, not mine. I never lied, I just never corrected them. Remember that, because a year later, I would say almost those exact words to the woman I married, and they would break her. To understand why I was so calm about being mistaken for a rich man's son, you have to understand why I stopped being one. My father, Chief Emeka Okafor, built an empire from nothing. Telecoms, then oil, then more than I ever kept track of. In Lagos, his name opened any door in the country. He is a great man. I need you to know that I mean that, even now. But great men often want their sons to be copies of themselves, and I was not a copy. He had my whole life mapped out before I could walk. I would study business. I would join the company. I would inherit the throne. Every conversation we ever had led back to the same place, the family business, the family name, the family plan. But I loved something he could never understand. I loved building things. Not owning things. Building them. Code, systems, products that didn't exist until I made them. To me, inheriting a fortune felt like being handed a finished painting and being told to sign my name at the bottom. I wanted to paint my own. The last real conversation I had with my father, I was 23. I told him I was moving to Seoul, that I had a job as a junior engineer, that I wanted to build my own life, from the ground, with my own 2 hands. He looked at me for a long time, and then he said the words I have never been able to forget. If you walk out of this house to go and be a clerk for other men, he said, then you are not my son. You will not have my name. You will not have 1 coin of what I built. I stood up. I said, then I'll build my own. And I walked out. He didn't call. I didn't call. Pride is a terrible inheritance, and both of us had received a full share. So by the time that journalist tilted her head and said Okafor, the name was legally still mine. But everything behind it was gone. The money, the empire, the father. All of it. I was a 28-year-old software engineer, with a good salary, a small apartment, and a secret the whole city had gotten exactly backwards. The whole city, including a family named Park. I didn't know it yet, but across the city, my name had landed on a very particular dinner table. Chairman Park was the kind of man who read the society pages the way other men read the stock market, looking for opportunities. And when he saw a photo of the Okafor heir, young and unmarried and living right here in Seoul, he saw exactly one thing: a door into a fortune bigger than his own. Chairman Park was wealthy, but wealth is a strange sickness. The more you have, the more terrified you become of the people who have more. His company was struggling under debt he hid from everyone. He needed a lifeline, and a marriage into the Okafor empire would not just save him, it would elevate the entire family for generations. There was only one problem: his daughter. Jeon Park was 26 years old, and, I will tell you honestly, one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen in my life. But her beauty is not what I remember most. What I remember is that she had been raised her entire life to believe one single thing: that love was a luxury, and money was survival. Her mother had married for love and spent 30 years watching that love curdle into resentment under financial pressure. And Jeon had absorbed one brutal lesson from that marriage: never make my mother's mistake. So when her father called her into his study one evening and told her about the young Nigerian billionaire's heir living in Seoul, she didn't argue. She didn't ask about love. She asked one question: is he really that rich? And her father smiled and said, "My daughter, he is richer than we will ever be." Neither of them knew they were building a plan on top of a lie. Neither of them knew the fortune they were hunting had been given away by an old man in Lagos who had disowned his only son. They thought they were the hunters. They had no idea. They arranged it perfectly. A chance meeting at a private art gallery opening. Chairman Park knew people who knew people. And suddenly I was invited to something exclusive, something a man of my supposed status should attend. I almost didn't go. I want you to notice how many times in this story I almost didn't do the thing that ruined me. But I went, and there she was. Jeon was standing in front of a painting, pretending to study it, and when I walked past, she turned, as if by accident, and our eyes met, and, I'm going to be honest with you, because there's no point lying now, my heart stopped. She was radiant. She smiled at me like I was the only person in the room. She asked me about the painting, and when I gave some clumsy answer, she laughed as if I had said something brilliant. I didn't know it was a performance. I didn't know every gesture had been rehearsed. All I knew was that a woman like this was looking at a man like me as if I mattered. And here is the part that still hurts. I fell for her honestly. She was playing a role, but I wasn't playing anything. Every feeling I had was real. That's the cruelty of what she did. She brought a costume to a fire, and I brought my actual heart. We talked for 2 hours that night. She asked me questions about my life, my dreams, what I wanted. I told her the truth about everything. Everything except the one thing she assumed she already knew. I told her I loved building things. I told her I wanted to create something of my own someday. She heard, modest billionaire's son with humble dreams, and she thought, perfect, easy to control. I heard a woman who understood me. We were both wrong, but only one of us was lying. After that, everything moved fast, too fast. I understand now that speed was the strategy. Chairman Park wanted the marriage locked in before anyone looked too closely at the Okafor family finances. Jeon called me the next day, then the next. She started appearing at little moments in my life. A coffee, a walk, a dinner, and every time, she made me feel like the most important man in Seoul. There was a mistake I kept making, and I want to confess it, because it's the root of everything. She would suggest expensive places, fine restaurants, a weekend at a beautiful resort, and I, a man on an engineer's salary, kept saying yes. I emptied my savings, month after month, to be the man she thought I was. I told myself it was worth it. I told myself, this is love, and love is expensive, and one day I'll explain everything, and she'll understand. I was spending money I didn't have to hide the fact that I didn't have money. Do you see how insane that is? I was going broke trying to look rich for a woman who only wanted me because she thought I was rich. 3 months in, she took me to meet her father. Chairman Park shook my hand with both of his, the handshake of a man closing a deal, not welcoming a son. He asked me almost nothing about myself. He asked a great deal about the family business back in Nigeria. I gave vague answers. He heard whatever he wanted to hear. And at the end of dinner, he said something I'll never forget. "Daniel," he said, "in my family, we don't believe in long engagements. When something is right, we move." 2 weeks later, Ji-eun asked me to marry her. She got down on one knee in a restaurant. "Modern," she said, "breaking tradition, so romantic." Everyone applauded. She was crying. I believed the tears. And I said yes. I said yes to a woman who was, at that exact moment, already texting another man about the fortune she was about to inherit. The wedding was enormous. Chairman Park spared no expense. Hundreds of guests. The finest hall in the city. Cameras, flowers, an orchestra. I remember standing at the front, watching it all, and thinking, how can I ever afford to give her a life like this? That thought, that fear, should have been my warning. A man should not spend his own wedding day terrified of the bill. Ji-eun walked down that aisle, and the entire room gasped. She was breathtaking, and when she reached me, she looked into my eyes and mouthed the words, "I love you," and God help me, I believed her one last time. Her father made a speech. He talked about joining 2 great families. He talked about the bright future ahead. He kept using the word future, and I understand now he wasn't talking about our marriage. He was talking about the money he thought was coming. My father was not there. Of course he wasn't. I told everyone he couldn't travel. Business in Lagos. The truth was, I had sent him a wedding invitation to an address I wasn't even sure was still his, and I had received nothing back. Not a card, not a call. Silence. The way silence had become the whole language between us. There was one person at that wedding who wasn't part of the Park family's plan. Mina Seo, my coworker, my friend. She sat near the back, and when I caught her eye during the ceremony, she gave me a small smile. But her eyes were sad in a way I didn't understand at the time. I thought she was just moved. I know now she was watching me marry the wrong woman, and saying nothing, because who was she to ruin my happiness? I'll come back to Mina. She matters more than anyone in this story. But that night, I barely thought of her. That night, I only thought of my bride. And then we went up to the honeymoon suite, and I poured 2 glasses of champagne, and I saw a phone light up on the bed. Relax. In 1 month, his father's company will be ours. And the wedding ended. The marriage, the real marriage, the true one, never even began. I want to tell you what I did after I read that message, because I think it's the most important decision I made in this entire story. I did nothing. I handed her the champagne. I smiled. I said something ordinary, and inside, while my whole world was quietly collapsing, I made a choice. I decided I would not scream. I would not throw the phone across the room. I would not give her the satisfaction of a dramatic scene she could twist and blame on me. Instead, I decided to watch. Because a single text message could mean 100 things. Maybe I misread it. Maybe there was an explanation. I owed my wife, the woman I had loved honestly that very morning, at least the chance to be innocent. So I waited. That night, lying next to her in the dark, listening to her breathe as she slept peacefully, while I stared at the ceiling, I made 2 promises to myself. The first promise was this: I will learn the truth, all of it, before I act. And the second promise was quieter and colder, and it frightened me a little even as I made it. If she married me for a fortune I don't have, then let her chase it. Let her chase it all the way to the bottom, and when she finally understands what she's done, I will be standing exactly where she can see me, and I will not save her. I didn't know then how I'd build a new life. I didn't know about the company that was coming, or the billions, or Mina. I just knew, in that dark honeymoon suite, that the woman beside me had made a bet. She bet everything on a man being rich, and she had bet on the wrong man. Some part of me, the wounded, honest part, went quiet that night and never fully woke up again. I didn't hate her yet. That would come later. That night, I just grieved. I grieved the marriage I thought I'd had for a single beautiful morning. We didn't have a honeymoon abroad. I couldn't afford it, and I made an excuse about work. She wasn't happy, but she let it go, because she thought there'd be a lifetime of yachts and private jets ahead. Why rush? Instead, she moved into my apartment. And this is where the lie I had let live finally died. I remember the exact moment. The moving truck pulled up outside my building, an ordinary building, in an ordinary neighborhood, and I watched her face through the car window as she looked up at it. The smile faded first, then confusion arrived, then something harder underneath. "Daniel," she said carefully, "what is this?" "This is home," I said. She laughed, a small, uncertain laugh. "No, I mean while the real house is being prepared. Where are we actually staying?" "This is where I live, Ji-eun. This is where I've always lived." She walked into my apartment. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, my desk with my used laptop, books stacked on the floor because I never bought enough shelves. Clean, modest, mine. She turned in a slow circle, and I watched the truth arrive in her eyes like a tide coming in. "Where," she said, and her voice was different now, flat and cold, "is the mansion?" I said nothing. "Where are the cars, the staff, Daniel, where is the money?" And I gave her the answer I had been waiting 8 days to give. I said, very quietly, "I never lied to you. You never asked." She detonated. I have never seen a person's beauty turn into something ugly so fast. Every soft, adoring expression she had ever shown me was gone, and behind it was a fury I hadn't known was there. "You tricked me!" she screamed. "Did I?" I said. "Tell me one time I told you I was rich. One time I mentioned my father's company. One time I promised you a mansion." She opened her mouth and closed it, because there wasn't one. There had never been one. Every assumption she'd made on her own, hunting a fortune she invented in her own imagination. "Everyone knows who you are," she hissed. "The Okafor heir. It was everywhere." "People wrote that," I said. "I never did. My father disowned me 5 years ago, Ji-eun. I haven't spoken to him. I have no company, no empire, no inheritance. I have this apartment and my job. That's who I've always been. You just never once bothered to find out." The silence after that was the loudest silence I've ever heard. And then, and this is the part I'll never forget, she didn't cry over a broken heart. She didn't ask, "How could you let me fall in love with a lie?" Because she had never fallen in love at all. She asked, "Do you have any idea what my father is going to do to me?" Not us. Me. That's when I understood, completely and finally, what I was to her. Not a husband, not a man, a transaction that had just collapsed. She grabbed her phone and walked into the bathroom and locked the door, and through it I could hear her frantic, whispered voice, calling her father, I assumed, to report that the deal had gone bad. I sat down on my own couch, in my own small apartment, on the 2nd day of my marriage, and I felt, of all things, free. I expected her father to demand a divorce immediately. I was almost looking forward to it, a clean cut, an ending. I was wrong about Chairman Park, deeply wrong. He summoned us both to his office 2 days later. Ji-eun sat beside me, pale and silent, and Chairman Park looked at me across his enormous desk with an expression of pure, cold calculation. I waited for the rage. It never came. What came was worse. "So," he said, "you are not the Okafor heir." "No, sir. You are a nobody, an engineer." He said the word engineer like it was something scraped off a shoe. "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said the thing that trapped all 3 of us for the next year. "There will be no divorce." Ji-eun's head snapped up. "Father." Silence. He didn't even look at her. "Do you understand what a divorce 2 weeks after a 500-guest wedding would do to this family? The whispers? The humiliation? Every rival I have would feast on it. No, absolutely not." He turned to me. "You will stay married. You will keep up appearances in public. What you do in private is your own misery, but this family's name will not be stained by scandal because my daughter was too stupid to check a man's bank account before falling into his bed." Ji-eun flinched like she'd been slapped. "And you," he said to me, "you got yourself into a wealthy family by accident. Consider it the luckiest mistake of your worthless life. Behave, stay quiet, and one day I might find a use for you." He stood. The meeting was over. And just like that, I was locked into a marriage with a woman who despised me, ordered to keep it going by a man who despised me more. I should have felt trapped. Instead, I remember thinking, very clearly, "You've all made a terrible mistake. You think you're keeping me, but you've just given me a front row seat to your entire downfall, and you're paying for the ticket." What followed were the strangest months of my life. On the outside, we were a married couple. At family dinners, Ji-eun would hold my arm and smile for the cameras. In public, we played our parts flawlessly. Chairman Park insisted on it. Inside that small apartment, we were strangers sharing a cage. She barely spoke to me. She slept in the bedroom. I slept on the couch. She treated me like an inconvenient piece of furniture she was contractually forbidden to throw away. Some days she looked at me with such contempt that I felt it before I even entered the room, and I let her. I never fought back. I never raised my voice. I said good morning. I made coffee. I went to work. I came home. I was unfailingly, maddeningly polite. And I think that politeness enraged her more than any insult could have. She wanted a villain to justify herself. I refused to give her one. But here's what she didn't notice, because she never once looked closely at me. Every night, after she went to bed, I went back to my desk, and I opened my laptop, and I built. Because somewhere in those first cold, humiliating weeks, an idea had taken root in me, a real one. The kind of idea that keeps a man awake not from pain, but from possibility. An idea about language, about connection, about two people from opposite ends of the earth being able to truly understand each other in real time. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was married to a woman I could not understand, who did not want to understand me, and I was building a machine to help strangers understand each other perfectly. I called the project Yun. In Korean, it means connection. It means fate. It was the one thing in my life that had either. I need to tell you about Mina Seo now, properly, because without her there is no story worth telling. Mina was my co-worker, a brilliant engineer, quiet, the kind of person who solves the hardest problem in the room and then says nothing about it. We'd worked side by side for 2 years. She was my friend before any of this began, and she was the only person in my entire life who knew the whole truth. She knew I wasn't rich, she'd always known, and she had never treated me differently for a single second, not when the whole city thought I was an heir, and not when my marriage turned my life into a quiet tragedy. One evening, I stayed late at the office, working on Yun, and Mina stayed too. She looked over my shoulder at the code, at the concept, and she went very still. "Daniel," she said slowly, "this isn't a hobby. Do you understand what this could be?" "It's just an idea," I said. "No." She pulled up a chair. She didn't ask permission. She just sat down beside me and started working. "It's not just an idea, and you're not building it alone anymore." That night, we worked until 3 in the morning, and something happened that I can only describe as this. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not the Okafor heir, not the humiliated husband, just Daniel, building something real, next to someone who believed in it. I want to be careful here, because I was a married man, and whatever my marriage was, I took the word seriously even when Ji-eun didn't. Nothing happened between Mina and me for a very long time. Nothing improper. I want that on the record. But I would be lying if I told you I didn't notice the difference. Ji-eun looked at me and saw a failed transaction. Mina looked at me and saw a future. And slowly, without either of us naming it, Yun stopped being my project and became ours. 2 engineers, 2 salaries poured back into servers and late nights, building something the whole world would eventually know, while my glamorous wife looked right past me, certain I was worth nothing. She never once asked what I did at that desk every night. She never asked. There's that phrase again. While Mina and I were building, Ji-eun was building something too. An escape. I found out slowly, the way you find out about a slow leak, a little evidence at a time. Perfume she wore for dinners she didn't invite me to. Nights she came home very late. A phone she now guarded like it held state secrets. And once, carelessly, because she'd stopped seeing me as someone worth hiding from. A name on her screen. Sung-ho. Kang Sung-ho. The heir to one of the largest property empires in the country. Old money. Real money. The kind she'd thought she was marrying. I did my research quietly. He was everything she'd wanted me to be. Rich, connected, established, and married, as it happened. Though that clearly wasn't slowing either of them down. I remembered the wedding night text. In 1 month, his father's company will be ours. She'd said ours. I'd always assumed she meant her and her father. Now I understood. She'd meant her and Sung-ho. She had planned, from before we were even married, to take my supposed fortune and eventually leave with a man she actually wanted. I was never the destination. I was the vehicle. And now that the vehicle had turned out to be worthless, she was simply upgrading, quietly, while her father's rule kept her legally chained to me. I'll tell you the truth about how I felt, because I promised you honesty. It didn't break my heart. My heart was already done with her. What I felt was something clearer and colder. I felt certainty. Any last flicker of guilt I might have carried, any small voice asking whether I was being fair by staying silent and letting her chase a ghost, that voice went quiet forever. She was betraying me while I slept. So I stopped feeling anything I owed her at all. And I went back to my desk. And I built faster. I don't want to give you the impression that success came easily, because it didn't. This is the part of the story I could have hidden, but I won't. There was a stretch, months, where Yon was failing. We had built something extraordinary, Mina and I, but building it and surviving it are two different things. We had poured every one we had into it. My savings, already gutted from those early dates with Jion, were nearly gone. Mina had drained hers too. We approached investors, and one after another, they said no. Interesting technology, they said, but 2 engineers with no business experience, no connections, no capital? Come back when you have traction. We couldn't get traction without money, and we couldn't get money without traction. It was a locked room, and I was exhausted, and there was a night, I'll admit it, where I sat at that desk and thought about quitting. That was also, cruelly, the night Ji-eun chose to notice me. She came home and saw me sitting there, defeated, and for 1 second I thought, foolishly, that she might ask what was wrong. Instead, she looked at my screen, at my code, and she laughed. "What is this?" She said, "Your little computer game? Is this what you do all night instead of being a real man?" She shook her head, already walking away. God, I married a child playing on a laptop. Sung-ho would never, she stopped herself, but not fast enough. And something strange happened inside me in that moment. Her mockery didn't crush me. It lit me. Because I looked at this woman who had betrayed me, humiliated me, and now mocked the one true thing I was building, and I thought, one day you're going to see this little computer game on the front page of every newspaper in Asia. And you're going to remember that you laughed. I turned back to my screen. Mina messaged me that same night. She'd found one more investor willing to take a meeting. One more. I didn't quit. That one last meeting changed everything. The investor was older, semi-retired, and unlike the others, he didn't ask about our connections or our pedigree. He asked us to show him the product. So we did. Mina spoke Korean into her phone. My phone, running Yon, spoke it back to me in perfect, natural English, instantly, with her tone, her pauses, her meaning fully intact. Then I spoke English, and Mina heard flawless Korean. Not stiff, robotic translation. Real, human, alive connection between 2 languages. The old man was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "In 40 years of business, I have crossed the world unable to truly speak to half the people I met. You've just handed me the thing I always wished I had." He looked at us. "How much do you need?" We got our funding that afternoon, and then the locked room finally opened. With capital, we could scale. With scale came users. A few thousand at first, then tens of thousands. Travelers, businesses, families split across countries, hearing each other clearly for the first time. Yon spread the way only a genuinely useful thing can spread. By word of mouth, person to person, because it solved something real. We hired a team. We moved out of my apartment's cramped desk and into a real office. Mina became my co-founder in title, as she had always been in truth. I remember the night we crossed 1 million users. Mina and I stood in our little office, exhausted, staring at the number on the screen, and neither of us said anything for a long time. Then she looked at me and said, "You did it, Daniel." And I said, "We did it." At home, Ji-eun still thought I played computer games at night. She had no idea the child on a laptop had quietly become one of the most watched founders in the country. The world was about to turn, and she was standing exactly where it would land. 1 year. That's how long it took. 1 year from the humiliation of that wedding night to the morning I want to tell you about now. Yun AI had become the fastest growing technology company in Korea. I'm not going to pretend I can describe what that felt like, because there's no honest word for it. Overnight, or what looked like overnight to everyone who hadn't watched the 1,000 sleepless nights behind it, I went from a disowned engineer in a one-room apartment to a name in every business publication in Asia. The valuation numbers became absurd. Investors who had said no were now calling daily, desperate to get in. Then the offers started, real ones, the kind that end in the word billion. A major global firm wanted to acquire a stake at a valuation I genuinely could not have imagined saying out loud a year earlier. I was, by any measure the world uses, extraordinarily wealthy, not because I inherited an empire, because I built one. And here is the thing I want you to understand, the thing that made all of it worthwhile, worth more than the money itself. I had proven my father wrong. He told me that if I walked out of his house to build my own life, I would be nothing, a clerk, a failure. He told me the only path to greatness ran through his empire, on his terms, wearing his name, and I had built something greater than anything he'd handed me, with my own 2 hands, from a used laptop, in a country far from home, with a woman who believed in me when no one else did. I hadn't just gotten rich. I had won an argument 20 years old. Now, I had kept all of this secret from Ji-eun and her father. Deliberately, I used a holding company. I kept my name out of the earliest headlines where I could, because I needed, one specific thing. I wanted them to find out at the exact moment it would hurt the most. And that moment was coming faster than any of them knew. They found out the way the whole world found out. The acquisition news was too big to keep quiet. It broke across every major outlet on the same morning. Yun AI, the translation startup reshaping global communication, valued in the billions, co-founded by Daniel Okafor and Mina Seo. My face, my name, my company. I was at the office when my phone started ringing. Ji-eun, then her father, then Ji-eun again, then numbers I didn't recognize, then people I hadn't heard from in years. I didn't answer any of them. I later pieced together what happened in the Park household that morning, and I'd give a great deal to have seen it. Ji-eun saw the news first. She saw my face on the screen next to a number with more zeros than her father's entire fortune, and she did not understand, she literally could not process it, that the man she'd been mocking as a child on a laptop was, and had been for months, one of the wealthiest self-made men in the country. She called her father, screaming that it must be a mistake. It was not a mistake. Chairman Park, the man who had called me a nobody, an engineer, the luckiest worthless mistake of a marriage. Chairman Park sat in his office and looked at the news, and I imagine he felt the floor tilt beneath him, because his own company, I'd since learned, was drowning. The debt he'd hidden for years had nearly caught up with him. He'd married his daughter off to chase a fortune to save himself, and that fortune had been sitting in his own home the entire time, sleeping on his son-in-law's couch, being treated like garbage. He had had a genuine billionaire in his family for a year, and he had spent that year humiliating him. The phones kept ringing. I let them ring. I had waited a year for this silence. I was going to enjoy every second of it. That night, I came home to the apartment. I still kept it, out of some private principle I couldn't fully explain, and Ji-eun was waiting for me. But she was a different Ji-eun. The contempt was gone. The coldness, the disgust, the way she'd looked through me for a year, all of it had vanished. In its place was something I had never seen on her face before. Fear. And underneath it, that old, practiced warmth, switched back on like a light. "Daniel," she said softly, standing as I came in. Oh my God, why didn't you tell me? All this time, I had no idea. You had every idea available to anyone who ever asked me a question, I said, hanging up my coat. You just never asked. I know things have been hard between us. She came closer. She reached for my hand. Her eyes were filling with tears, and I'll give her this. She was very, very good at it. But we're married, Daniel. Whatever happened, we're husband and wife. We can start again. I can be the wife you always deserved. I want to be. I looked at the woman who, 1 year ago tonight, had lain in a honeymoon suite texting another man about the fortune she planned to steal, who had called me a child, who I knew for a fact, was still seeing Kang Sung-ho, even as she stood here holding my hand and crying. Ji-eun, I said gently, where were you last Thursday night? The tears stopped for just a fraction of a second, just long enough. Home, she said. You were with Sung-ho, I said. You've been with Sung-ho for most of our marriage. I've known for almost a year. The color drained from her face. But it's funny, I went on, and my voice was very calm. Now that I'm the richest man you've ever stood next to, suddenly you want to start again. She had no answer. For once in her life, Ji-eun Park had absolutely nothing to say. The next morning, there was a knock at my office door. I looked up, and I could not believe who was standing there. My father, Chief Emeka Okafor, in Seoul, in my office. 5 years of silence, walking through my door in an expensive suit, looking older than I remembered, looking at his son the way he had never once looked at me before. With respect. For a moment, neither of us spoke. 20 years of pride stood in the room between us. Then he said quietly, I read about your company. I flew here the same day. I said nothing. He looked around my office, the team, the awards already collecting, the evidence of something built entirely without him, and his eyes, when they came back to me, were wet. When you walked out of my house, he said, his voice rough, I told you that you were nothing without my name, that you would be a clerk, a failure. He shook his head slowly. I have spent 5 years being wrong, and too proud to say it. He stepped closer. You built this, he said, with nothing, with no help from me, with less than no help, because I cursed you on your way out the door, and you built something greater than what I would have handed you. His voice broke. Daniel, now you've become the man I always wanted you to be. I stood there, and I felt 20 years of anger and grief rise up in me, and then, slowly, set down. Because here's the thing about revenge. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. I thought I'd want to throw his words back in his face. You said I was nothing. Look at me now. But standing in front of my broken, humbled, weeping father, I didn't want that at all. I walked over, and I put my hand on his shoulder, and I said, Thank you, Father. That's all I ever needed you to see. Some doors, when they finally open, you walk through. You don't burn them down. I forgave my father that day. But my wife? That door I was about to close forever. I called Ji-eun and Chairman Park to a meeting, a formal one, at my office. I told them it was to discuss the future of the marriage. They came full of hope. I could see it on both their faces. Chairman Park, drowning in his hidden debts, was practically vibrating with the possibility that his billionaire son-in-law might now save him. Ji-eun had dressed beautifully, softly, playing the devoted wife ready to reconcile. They sat across from me at the conference table. Chairman Park spoke first, and the contempt of a year ago was gone, replaced by something almost desperate. Daniel, son, I think we all understand that things were said in the past that, well, families quarrel. What matters is the future. And I believe our two families, united, could accomplish extraordinary things. There may even be certain opportunities where my experience could guide your enterprise. He wanted a bailout. He was asking his son-in-law to save the empire that had spent a year treating him like dirt. I let him finish. Then I slid a folder across the table. Ji-eun opened it, smiling, expecting, I don't know what. Reconciliation, a joint account, a future. Her smile died. Inside were divorce papers. Not new ones. Her papers. The exact divorce documents she herself had drawn up in secret 1 year earlier. The ones she'd prepared to throw at me the moment her father allowed it, back when I was worthless to her. I had found them long ago. I had kept them, and I had waited. You prepared these a year ago, I said quietly, to be rid of me the second it was convenient. I thought it was only right that we finally used them. Daniel, she started. I've already signed, I said. You just have to sign where you always intended to. She stared at me, and her hands were shaking, and she whispered, You can't do this. My father, the family, the scandal. I looked at Chairman Park, who had gone gray. There won't be a scandal, I said, because I'm not the disgraced party. I'm the man's soul's most celebrated founder, whose wife was carrying on an affair with a married property heir for the entire length of a sham marriage, arranged to steal a fortune. If this becomes public, it doesn't touch me. I let that sit. It buries you. Silence. And then I said the words I'd been carrying for exactly 1 year. I leaned forward, and I said them softly, almost kindly. On our wedding night, you texted him that in 1 month my father's company would be ours. I let her feel it. You spent a year chasing a fortune that was never mine to give, and you stepped over the only real one, the one I built with someone who actually saw me, every single night, on your way to bed. Her eyes filled. Some opportunities, I said. Only knock once. She signed. Her hand was trembling so badly she could barely hold the pen, but she signed, because there was nothing else left to do. Her father didn't say a word. He couldn't. He'd come to be rescued, and instead he'd watched his last lifeline sign herself out of the only fortune that could have saved him. As they stood to leave, Ji-eun turned back at the door. And for one moment, one single honest moment in a marriage built entirely on lies, the performance dropped away completely, and I saw something real underneath. I saw a woman who understood exactly what she had done. I could have loved you, she said quietly, couldn't I? If I'd been a different person, if I'd looked. I didn't answer right away, because it was true, and we both knew it, and there was no cruelty I could add that would land harder than that truth already had. Yes, I finally said. You could have. And then, gently, Goodbye, Ji-eun. She walked out. She had traded true love for the promise of money, and in the end, she lost both. She had no husband, no fortune. Her father's empire would collapse under its hidden debts within the year. And Kang Sung-ho, the wealthy man she'd betrayed me for, went straight back to his own wife the moment the scandal risk appeared, and never spoke to her again. She was left with nothing but the memory of everything she'd stepped over. I, on the other hand, was just getting started. I want to end where the real story always was. Not with Ji-eun, not with revenge, with Mina. The evening after the divorce was finalized, Mina and I stayed late at the office, the way we always had, back when it was just the two of us, and a used laptop, and an impossible dream. Everyone else had gone home. It was quiet. She looked at me across the desk and said, carefully, So it's really done. It's done, I said. She nodded. She looked down at her hands. And I realized, after 2 years of standing beside this woman, after everything she'd given to build this life with me, that she had never once said what I now knew she'd felt for a very long time. She'd stayed silent through my marriage, through my humiliation. She'd protected my happiness even when it cost her everything, and she'd never asked for a single thing in return. So this time, I didn't wait. I didn't stay silent. I'd learned exactly what silence costs. Mina, I said, you saw me. When I was a disowned nobody that the whole city was laughing at behind my back, when I had nothing but an idea and a used laptop, you're the one who pulled up a chair and said you're not building this alone anymore. My voice caught. You never once asked what I was worth. You only ever asked what we could build. She looked up at me. I don't want to build the rest of it alone either, I said. And Mina Seo, brilliant, quiet, loyal Mina, who had believed in me before there was anything to believe in, finally smiled the way I'd waited 2 years to see. She'd loved me for who I was, which is the only reason on earth I could love her back. 2 years later, Yun AI had become one of the largest technology success stories in all of Asia. Mina and I had married. A small wedding, 30 people, no cameras, no orchestra, no 500 guests hunting a fortune. Just the people who actually loved us. And we had a daughter. I saw Ji-eun one last time. It was at a public event. She was there on the arm of someone, I don't know who, still chasing the same thing she'd always chased. Our eyes met across the room. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt nothing. The clean, quiet nothing you feel toward a chapter that closed a long time ago. I turned and walked toward the exit, and I reached down and took my daughter's small hand in mine, and Mina slipped her arm through my other one, and the three of us walked out together into the evening. I didn't need to hear what Ji-eun whispered as she watched us go, but somehow, I already knew. If only I had loved the man instead of the money. She'd had a billionaire in her home for a year, and she never saw him because she was too busy looking for one. And I'd had everything I ever needed, the whole time, sitting one chair away at a used laptop, asking me not what I was worth, but what we could build together. She married me for my money. But she never knew the richest thing about me was the one thing she never wanted.